joined the Taiwan Act. That is, he voted yes for Taiwan Act like 30 years ago. So that report, he is the only one that's still remaining in the House. So that's one of the reporting point for Ed Markey.
Yeah, Tyler. So this is kind of part of the tit for tat, but it's more of a chess move to show after the fact that it was planned all along, as they're going to blockade and basically China imposed sanctions that they weren't going to do certain trade with Taiwan, not the high end stuff. And then the U.S. shows up the next week to say, "Hey, we'll buy it from you. We'll supply it from to you. Don't you worry." So I think it's kind of like a good analog would be East and West Berlin. We're showing that if they move, try to escalate and do things, that we still own that sea navally. So there's a lot behind that's not being spoken by the fact that we showed up and they didn't even tell it to their people.
Well, I think there's a more subtle argument here. It's that our ships have people on them. Are you really going to kill Americans? Wait till you see how that goes down, because whenever you hear about Americans being here, somewhere there, America always does what it can to save its people. They take that stuff very seriously. A very few other nations have the same kind of attitude towards the safety of their citizens as America. So even their servicemen and women and other members should be taken as it's a military weapon, but it's also almost a next level strategy move, because then you really have to take lives. It's not just drones versus drones, or in some instances cyber warfare without casualties. This could be like a huge diplomatic disaster for China if they were to try to be aggressive. So I definitely agree with that.
Hmm. Okay. In other non-tech news, Cheryl just DM'd me that the governor of Michigan, one of the largest states in the U.S., by the way, has declared a state of emergency and is telling people they don't have any more drinking water. And they're going to need to boil whatever water they can get their hands on, because it's become contaminated from Lake Huron water treatment facility, yada, yada, yada. And that's your daily reminder to take control of your own water supply. So, into the tech news, shall we? Obviously, I got to make tradition of doing the air horn. Here we go. With 54 minutes remaining, Galaxy Digital terminates its $1.2 billion acquisition of crypto custodian BitGo after the service failed to provide audited statements. So, hold on one second, please. All right, next up, Mark Gurman over there at Bloomberg says he's got sources. He's always got sources that Apple Ads team lead Todd Teresi now reports directly to Eddie Q and wants to increase the group's ad revenues from $4 billion per year to double digits. So Apple's going to grow their ad business from a measly paltry $4 billion to over $10 billion, probably 20, probably 100 by the end of the decade. So there it is. Plain right there's that's Moses with the tablets right there. As we've been saying for damn near a year, Apple wants to be the big advertiser. They took out Facebook. It used to be Google is the big advertiser, for those who don't know the name of the game. And Facebook was number 2, and Apple took out Facebook. Apple's going to be number 2, and there it is. So, but now it's totally obvious. It was all tea leaves and smoke screens and smoke signals that we were correctly assessing at the time, but they were very faint smoke signals on the horizon. But you heard it here way back then, a year ago. Oh, these moves that Apple's doing indicate that they want to take out Facebook and be the next big ad network next to Google, and now it's official. That makes it official. When they say we want to raise the ad group's revenues from single digits to double digits, and hiring team leads that report directly, that they're just making all the obvious moves now. So it's full steam ahead for that. Okay, next up, New York Times. Ahead of U.S. midterms, the elections, Look at TikTok's ongoing struggles to contain misinformation. Oh boy, are they struggling! What a struggle! It's such a difficult struggle. Like in China, where they really struggle to contain information on the Chinese version of TikTok. It's such a struggle. They have such a hard time doing it, and there's just all this election misinformation going on in TikTok. And boy, it's just so hard for them to control what's happening on their app. With
But can
all
you
of
even find one video of a tank on TikTok at
you can't,
near
you,
a bank?
for some reason you can't find a single mention of the Tiananmen Square massacre at all. It's really peculiar over there in China, but wow, over here in the U.S. you've got all kinds of misinformation. So this article from the New York Times is about the ongoing struggles to contain misinformation during the elections. Come on. And by the way, I saw another article. I hope it comes up. Somebody will find it and share it in the DMs or whatever, about how Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. is now growing very tiresome of TikTok's shenanigans. And they're now starting to believe, get this, that TikTok might actually be a tool of the CCP. That it's actually,
Wow.
I
Did
remember
we
now,
talk about it here?
the sub point of the article was that its intention is to addict you like a drug and manipulate your mind. That's the expressed
Yes. We
code.
remember the discussion we had here many times actually, that this is like a psychologically manipulating tool for the young minds and developed specifically for that purpose.
I seem to recall some people discussing that in this room at some point. So there's a sub article that says, "Oh, look at the growing bipartisan." That means both parties, which never agree on anything in America, and nothing at all. However, they do agree on their scrutiny of TikTok in the U.S. According to an email, House officials told staff they did not recommend using the app, citing security concerns. National security concerns over Chinese-owned viral app remain unresolved. Lawmakers and regulators are increasingly pushing for action. Oh, wow. Wow. Who could have seen this coming? Next up, New York Times. Andreessen Horowitz invests in Adam Newman's residential real estate management startup called Flow. And for those who aren't good with names, Adam Newman should ring a bell because he was the CEO, co-founder of WeWork. And now Andreessen Horowitz, considered by many to be the top venture capital firm in the world, is investing in Adam Newman's new residential real estate management startup called Flow. Sources say $350 million at $1 billion valuation, the firm's largest ever individual checks. So here we go again. Adam Newman if anyone should ever write a book on how to raise a shit ton of money, Adam Newman is the king of raising money. Holy cow.
I am amazed that anybody gave him money after that WeWork disaster.
Yeah,
I'm just, amazed.
I would like to know
watching.
if one of the terms in the agreement is that his wife cannot write the IPO. What's the paper that they have to put together before the IPO? Like a Section 16 or whatever it's called.
There's usually an S1 is what you're talking
S1
about
filing. Thank you.
for a prospectus.
That
Yeah.
is S1.
I mean, whoever has someone like that, right, she wrote the S1 for WeWork. You didn't have lawyers do it.
Who has pictures in it?
They put
We
pictures.
have pictures. There are pictures sometimes in an S1.
Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah. So what?
That's not.
Ken, I'm guessing you didn't watch the Jared Leto Anne Hathaway.
I watched part of it, but I just I didn't see that part. And just because it's in a made for TV film
Yeah.
or whatever doesn't mean
Yeah.
it's true.
I think this is the critical part of the entire. This is when it goes from things going okay to everything going wrong all of a sudden. This was the turning point. The absolute turning point was when Adam's wife decides they are going to write their own S1 and do it their way, which included photos and very colorful language and very colorful accounting.
Yeah, it's like, hey, we're going to remove administrative and all these other things, and we're going to give like a very lean profile
Which,
of
by the
what's
way,
happening in the business, which is
which by the
not
way,
accurate.
which by the way, did happen, and that's what got the whole Wall Street freaking out about the WeWork IPO because of this new creative accounting that they drummed up in their S1, and so I imagine it is based on some version of reality. So anyway, but by the way, in watching that documentary, uh, and by watching the who was it that did the fantastic interview, very long interview with Adam Newman at CNBC. Sorkin did an interview with him recently, not that long ago, a few months ago. I think the guy's actually backable, investable. Like I would give the
He only lost his shit at one point where he was like, oh nope, got to be focused, got to be disciplined, and I was like, whoa, that's like either a temper or like that was the only thing in that interview that was kind of strange.
How was their CPA okay with all that?
no that there. I think you're touching on the nerve of the problem, which was it was a little too top heavy, a little too authoritarian in the way that it was managed. It was a little too, and some companies do this, where you get a character who becomes too large within an organization, and they, everyone else kind of, and that's the problem when you have governments that are run that way. They all end up eventually failing and toppling. So because you get,
So,
you know,
so Tyler, there's an expression that the whale who surfaces gets harpooned. This could be a terrible thing for Andreessen Horowitz because there is already a lot of political pressure and whatever against institutional investors in residential real estate. Mostly that's in the single family home side by, like Innovation Homes, which was spun off from Blackstone. This is going to be like another example of, institutional investors, forcing out individuals and like, it's not like they're the first ones that thought of it. So basically, they're like now the tail end of a wave, and they may become the absolute political target of Congress for being in this business. But
check this out. You know how I've been ranting regular every so often that there's an incredibly huge issue, particularly in the U.S., but it's not exclusive to the U.S., about housing and how there's going to be a whole tons of millions of unhoused people, and there's a desperate need and opportunity between the standard one bedroom or studio apartment and homelessness. There's why isn't there something in between there? Because you're now going to have tens of millions of people who can no longer afford the studio apartment, and generally when people can't afford the studio apartment, they resort to living in their car, right, in a parking lot somewhere, trying to get by, or hopefully they can crash on somebody's sofas or whatever. But there should be something in between, $1,200 a month and free. It's really bizarre that there's such a huge gap between living under a freeway underpass and a studio apartment. That's a huge gap that needs to be addressed right now, to the tune of 40 million people who are no longer paying their rents because they can't afford to, right? Huge, crazy opportunity to house people at 300, 500, $700 a month. Adults, right? I mean, college kids do it all day long. They put four people in a bedroom on air mattresses or whatever. Adults, you got to come up with a more adult-like, and I would propose like a Tokyo capsule hotel-like situation. Now, I say that because Andreessen Horowitz just wrote a very lengthy blog post about why they just invested in Adam Neumann, because no doubt they're self-aware that people are going to be very curious as to why they're giving this guy $350 million at a billion valuation, and here's their explanation. Opening sentence. I'll pin it to the top of the room. It says, "Our nation has a housing crisis." They got that right. They're off to a good start. "The demographic trends driving America's housing market are impossible to ignore. Our country's creating households faster than we're building houses. Structural shortages in available homes for sale push house prices higher, while young people are staying single for longer and increasingly concentrating in highly desirable urban centers." Yep, that's exactly true, by the way. And that's an important realization, is young folks are trying to move closer and closer into city centers. And they are staying single, which means that's one income instead of two to buy a residence. Do you see where this is going? At the same time, while prices are going to the moon. So the first model is you own your own home, blah, blah, blah. The second model, you rent an apartment, but it's a soulless experience. Do you ever meet your neighbors, much less have any friends in the complex? Does it feel like home or just a place to sleep? Are you proud to bring your friends or family to visit them, etc.? And it says, now drop the impact of COVID onto this. Many people will live in places far away from where they work, and many more will shift to a hybrid environment. As a result, they will experience much less, if any, of the in-office social bonding and friendship that local workers enjoy. So what they're referring to there is you're no longer having the pre-COVID go to work social life that you used to have. You're now going to be sitting at home in your apartment all day. And this is a problem. And this, by the way, is fundamental, is in fact the essence of what WeWork was trying to address, which is essentially loneliness. And that's what Adam was really trying to address, one of the world's biggest problems, which is loneliness, which, by the way, has only gotten exponentially worse due to COVID and due to the fact that people are going to be working at home and remotely. So that might mean WeWork might not be the right solution anymore, because they want to work at home. But now the question is, how do you redefine home when you can't even afford a one-bedroom apartment? By the way, WeWork was working on something called We Live as a follow-up to WeWork, before, just as WeWork was imploding. Very few people know that. But We Live was going to be this is sort of taking a page out of Adam's previous book. And this sounds a little bit like a pitch for We Live in a way, honestly. It says, for many people, increasing screen time and reducing in-person interaction will cause challenges, At the same time, in the last 2 years, we've seen a shift in life priorities. For hundreds of years, ambitious young people have had to move to immediate geographic co-location with employers to have access to the best jobs for their skills and talents. And they're talking about like Chinese dorm living is what it sounds like. That is suddenly no longer true. This newfound flexibility has triggered the Great Resignation in China. So they are hinting about China. That's a kind of winky, winky, nudge, nudge there. Because the Great Resignation and the lay down, and that people are tired of, they don't want to play that game anymore. It's not in any way unique to China at all. This is a very global phenomenon, by the way, so I'm not trying to make any political comments here. Where people prioritize other factors over professional considerations. Many people are voting with their feet and moving away from traditional economic hub cities to different cities, towns, and rural areas with no diminishment of economic opportunity. The residential real estate world needs to address these changing dynamics, and yet virtually no aspect of the modern housing market is ready for these changes. This is a brilliant pitch, by the way. And so we're excited to partner with Adam Neumann and his colleagues at Flow, which is a direct strike on precisely this problem. Adam is a visionary leader who revolutionized the second largest asset class in the world, commercial real estate, by bringing community and brand to an industry. We think it's natural that for his first venture since WeWork, Adam returns to the theme of connecting people through transforming their physical spaces and building communities where people spend the most time, which is their homes. The residential real estate, the world's largest asset class, is ready for exactly this change. Shelter is one of our most basic needs in a world where limited access to home ownership continues to be a driving force, etc. Blah blah blah. So,
So this is home as a service?
It's We Live, is what it is.
Yeah, I think it's more global living home as a service because when they had the We Live piece, they had a really nice place in New York. You can get, I think they were trying to go in competition with like Airbnb and hotels. You can get a really nice place in New York for about $800 a week. They had it over on Wall Street.
I think this is called share house co-living in Japan. It has been around for a decade.
Yeah, Japan, as usual, is 10 years ahead on this stuff. Japan, culturally, socially, anthropologically, social anthropology, has been, and I've been tracking this since I was 19 years old, uh, when I was living there, they're 10 years ahead on the human social developmental curve. It's really bizarre, but they're consistently 10 years ahead. And this is yet another example of that. They went through the working, in your tiny little apartment by yourself and not dating and not having kids and not having sex. They started that trend 10 years before the rest of us, and they are now living 10 years ahead of where we will be in 10 years, which is this plays. They already have solutions around creative new models of cohabitating. So anyway,
Just
it's
on
going
the
to
cultural context, right? Because people here, they respect each other's space and there's trust relationship. Will this work in US?
don't know. I mean, like social commerce, it might have to take its own form. But by the way, now there's innovation goes both ways. When you have innovations that happen in the U.S., when they arrive in Japan, Japan reinterprets them in a Japanese way. They Japanese them, and similarly, when things come from Asia to the West is going to have to westernize it in their own way, and their social commerce is currently going through that sort of shape shifting situation. Next story. Court documents in Brazil show that Microsoft sold approximately 58.5 million Xbox One units in total. Who cares? Next, Wired reporting that a quote unquote jailbreak for John Deere tractors, helping farmers modify and repair them, highlights issues with securing farming equipment and the right to repair debate. Dear Wired, that story is itself nearly 10 years old. Jesus Christ. I beg to have $1 every time I've seen that headline about John Deere tractors are locked and Ukrainian hackers hack them so that the farmers can actually repair their own tractors without having to go to the John Deere thing, and they just lock them up, kind of like the McDonald's ice cream machines situation, where every time they break, you have an exclusive with who's able to fix these things, and this all falls under the right to repair things. Shouldn't tractor owners and farmers be able to repair their own goddamn tractors? Of course they should. Don't sign the goddamn contract that locks you into this John Deere bullshit where they're the only ones who can fix your fucking tractors. That's just totally stupid. I don't necessarily blame John Deere for trying. I mean, but people got to read the goddamn contracts and don't sign agreements that you don't agree to. There's other tractor manufacturers back then, before people blindly kind of signed over, the repair rights to John Deere, and it's just totally screwed up. Anyway, next up from Reuters. Around 2 years ago, Apple updated its employee conduct policy to prohibit discrimination on the basis of caste. And everyone living outside of Asia is like, what the hell are you referring to? And Apple employs a whole lot of people from India, like tens of thousands. And if you go
And
to,
there it's common, right? There the caste system is
by the way,
basically accepted.
our friend Sid Kumar from Stockholm is of Indian origin and works at Apple, is a dear friend. Awesome, one of the smartest, coolest dudes I know. And we should ping him in here to comment on the caste situation at Apple. Anyway, the article says that making it, they prohibit discrimination on the basis of caste, making it a leader on the issue alongside IBM. America's tech giants are taking a modern day crash course in India's ancient caste system. And the problem is when you have team members from India in Silicon Valley, and they're on a project together, and they're from different castes, you're going to have internal Indian politics going on. that the company's kind of unawares of, or they would prefer to not have to even think about any of that. Saudamini, you being the resident Indian on stage, I wonder if you have any thoughts on this.
Yes, snide politics and nepotism is a result of being casteist. People favor their own people, and of course, India is divided with so many languages, so they even talk to each other in their language that nobody understands. Even
Ah,
within India, we have that.
right.
And being in HR, I see this on a day to day basis.
Wow.
And I noticed when during my trip to India, certain people are not allowed in certain spaces, and based on their castes, people don't even talk to them. They don't address them as they are similar level of human being. Is so weird. It's like even animals are treated better than these people, some of them, based on the caste. And there are certain indicators of the way they are clothing, the colors that they are wearing, the food they are eating, the places they are not allowed to enter. It's just so different. I mean, it's you just have to visit there to understand. It's a totally different kind of a way to look at human race, and that I don't know if it's just religious or just classist, but it was astonishing to even uh, witness. Very different the way your mindset is when, and I wonder what happens when different people from different castes are working together. Are they able to let go of those pre-formed mind models based on which their entire life was, you know, um, very, very fascinating, this human psychology, this aspect.
Sometimes it seems like the caste system has been around since ancient alien times in India, just a really long time.
That's kind of true. And it defines hierarchy and how people command respect from the lower caste. And when the lower caste does not want to do that, then there is revolt.
Okay. So next,
Hey, Tyler, if I could just touch back on two stories that you did. So I
sure.
just took a very quick look at the WeWork IPO,
Yeah.
the S1. So
Yeah.
I doubt she did that on her own. I think that was Flair. But they use something called an Up-C structure. They're not the first ones to do it. It is rare. It was basically like a tax scheme so that they could pay less taxes because they had an LLC. It isn't all that dissimilar from the way a lot of REITs are structured, real estate investment trusts, because technically those are really up REITs, so it has elements of that. But I understand like what people were floored by the complexity, but people were also floored by the level of their financial obligations, that they had undertaken with the company, and and quite frankly, the cult that he kind of created, I think, probably had more to do with the
It was it was
demise of the company.
there was a Wall Street Journal article that came out at the time, and they were similar to Facebook, really. Try and Uber. It's like the tech journalists were at times went a little above and beyond in their hunt to try and take down these incredible rocket ship companies like Uber and WeWork and and Facebook and what have you, and even dance on the a little over the line in terms of what's journalism and fair or whatever. So in the WeWork case, they were right to point out that and this is where this is the job of journalism, and this is a respectable and a necessary practice. They were they pointed out that Adam had bought buildings himself and then was renting them to WeWork, and had bought the name WeWork himself and had sold it to WeWork, and there were some shenanigans that definitely deserved being pointed out, and he deserves a lot of blame for doing some foolish decisions that ended up costing him billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars. And I think it was a weird concrescence of uh,
Well, it was costing investors because he ended up walking away with a ton of money despite blowing the thing up. So,
yeah, well, yeah. I mean,
yeah.
he walked away with relatively small compared to what he should have, what he would have walked away with had he kind of played things a little more straight or a little more conventional.
Yeah,
Okay,
but the end of We Crash was something like Masayoshi-san says, who wins in a fight? Crazy man or the smart man? The man with all the money, right? So I think there's also that element that there was some sort of market manipulation, perhaps suggested in the script.
Well, there was also mismanagement of the money, right? He was buying like private jets and things like that, or charter flights and things like that. Just crazy things that he raised the money for the company, but then just using it for
now
personal things.
I would
But if
argue.
everyone around you tells you you're not crazy enough, you have to be more crazy, you have to focus on growth. Like the arguments that Adam Newman made in the actual interview rather than the show, he said, if everyone around you is giving you the wrong kind of signals, how can you be blamed for listening to the strongest signals? That's usually, a function of the people that you put around or surround yourself with. So I guess he's just being more careful.
So there's
Well, isn't that like his third startup? He should. You would expect that he would be more experienced by then. Yeah, I'm sure founders are always having to balance between investors and the team and other things, but from what I understand, he is really experienced founder. That was WeWork was his third company, successful. Well, not so successful, but he did exit a couple of them before. So I thought
no,
he would have experience.
no, he really didn't have any experience, and when certainly managing one of the largest, fastest growing companies, when in those situations, and you could say that Travis from Uber also was in this situation. When you're building one of the fastest growing companies in the history of planet Earth, you need to have not only your direct team members, and you need a very healthy relationship with your board of directors, and they need to be correctly the right seats in the bus to help steer things in the right direction. And back to Eric's point, Masayoshi-san is very unique as a sort of chairman of the board figure because he is all about go crazy, go big and beyond and wild and footloose and fancy free, and that was sort of the wrong signal to give to Adam. He didn't really need that kind of encouragement. He needed sort of the opposite. He needed, and that's sort of what ended up costing him. Now on the private plane issue, WeWork was adding new locations near and towards the last year of the company on a nearly daily basis. They had hundreds of locations. They had 45 locations in China alone.
Or if an enterprise customer in some city was like, "Hey, yeah, we want to get this set up.
Oh,
When can you
Steve,
get here?" I think was the other argument.
the biggest companies in the world were begging to spend ungodly amounts of money for WeWork to build and manage their new office buildings. And that was going to be insanely lucrative for WeWork leading into the IPO. Microsoft, IBM had just paid them billions, hundreds of millions, very, very, very large amounts to build and manage their new campuses and offices and headquarters. This is that was not the traditional WeWork model of your idiot cousin picking his nose in front of a laptop at a WeWork drinking the free coffee. This is a huge, huge opportunity that WeWork was riding. It was done. Those deals were done, and the amount of flights necessary for Adam to fly all over the world to meet with all of these buildings, they were in the process of taking over commercial real estate globally. Tell me you don't need if there's a person on earth who needs a plane, it would have been him.
There's
More than
actually a really good There's a really good YouTube video where they show how like a Walmart executive needs a private jet because they can do the rounds in a few days or even a single day sometimes because of the turnaround and the airports and delays and things. So I think for an executive it really does make sense. Although I think he admitted that he could have done a timeshare instead of actually buying the private jet
Yeah,
itself.
technically yes, but anyway, I mean, my point is this: is the Wall Street Journal article questions Adam Newman having a plane of his own and flying around and blah blah blah. Yeah, you're a journalist. Do you have the flight logs? Do you know what meetings he was going to? No, you don't. And to raise that issue, you're raising that issue because you want to kill this company because you are a envious journalist of someone building one of the world's biggest companies. And so you're using a data point that you know really not the details of. So why are you raising it? That is just really abhorrent behavior to be trying to sabotage a company as they're IPOing at their most vulnerable moment. I'm cool with pointing out misdoings and misgivings, and I applaud it. That's legitimate journalism. Like, hey, here's a fact. In fact, here's the details. He owns the name and he sold it to the company. That's wrong. Amen. That's wrong. That's totally bullshit. He needs to be called out for that. Item number two, he purchased buildings and was renting them to WeWork. That's fucked up. That you should have a story that says Adam is fucked up. This is fucked up. Here's what he's doing. I'm all on board with that. The airplane one, go ahead and make your best case for what exactly wrong he did in having a plane. And I would encourage you to try and name a person on the planet who was more needing of an airplane at that time, and try and include that in as part of your story. I challenge you to do that. You'll have a very difficult time doing it. So don't go over, don't stretch things. That's not your job as a journalist to make points that you don't have a business making. I mean, you can, but unfortunately, we're in an age of lack of critical thinking. And when the person reads in the Wall Street Journal, oh my God, he was abusing his private plane without much additional context, it's unfortunate. Anyway, and that's
He's
where
annoying. I think he's annoyingly successful, and it just rubs some people the wrong way, and they can't
100%,
let it go.
1,000%. By the way, the game between tech journalists and tech companies, and I've been right in the middle of that. It's really an unsavory situation that exists between tech companies and tech journalists, and this uh, power dynamic of friendships and alliances and frenemies and sabotage that is going on there. And Tesla suffers from it incredibly. And the problem is the journalists are very competitive with each other, and they're competing to get exclusives from Tesla or from Microsoft or from anybody. And if you don't give them exclusives, then next thing you know, they're starting to write some bad articles about you. And now you got to manage these relationships. And that's why you end up hiring PR people at your company who are former journalists themselves, who, have all of these relationships with all these. It's just a crazy game that is very difficult to do properly. And that's why Google ends up hiring hundreds of PR people who all worked at those companies and all have friends there. And it's really sad that is the way that the sausage gets made. Anyway, moving on. An in-depth.
Tyler, one other subject, story that you covered already, just very quickly, because this will be very quick. Michigan, it was a water main break. It only impacted four
Yeah,
counties. It only impacts 10% of the state's population. So let's not overstate what's going on in Michigan.
and what's the
They had a
population
what?
of Michigan?
What?
What's the population of Michigan?
It's like 9 million people, and this impacted
Yeah,
900,000 people. So.
yeah. A million people without drinking water, I would consider a serious
I'm not
situation.
saying it's not, but it's not. It's not some sort of climate, driven. There was a water main break.
Yeah, it's polluted water. They have to boil the water. My point is the same. Take control of your own water because your government is incapable of taking care of it.
even if you capture your own rainwater, now it's recommended that you filter that given the microplastics that they've found in rainfall all across the planet. So we've kind of fucked ourselves with rainfall
Dear,
now.
dear million Michigans, I told you so. You're now showering in sewage. You dumb fuck. Take care, Tyler.
You,
Ha 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 ha. How about we do it that way?
you know, like anywhere in the world, when the pretty much like all the water resources are going to dry up, they're going to be still in the Great Lakes. So I think that's like a bit far-fetched. That Michigan, if they're not able to actually get that city water supply because their filtration plant has gone down, yeah, just go get in the buckets, like boil it and just use it. I mean, that's not like a life-threatening scenario. It's never going to ever happen around the Great Lakes. So yeah,
Um, yeah,
I
no,
don't
no.
have to go with you, but yeah.
Well, no, no. The water can be contaminated with something other than what boiling can get rid of. So it's a little bit more nuanced than that. The kind of pollution, the kind of chemicals that are used to neutralize pathogens and other things at wastewater treatment plants, I think it's also of concern. So
I
a bit more
agree
to the
because
story here.
if you study the Great Lakes, I mean, there's first of all, you cannot actually put any kind of water in the Great Lakes. Secondly, in terms of the contamination, if it's contamination, it's going to be just natural procedure. It's not like through the factories they are actually dumping the water in the, Lake Michigan or Lake Erie or like Ontario. That's not going to happen. So, I mean, that's the most cleanest water you can actually get on the face of the earth, pretty much. I mean,
No,
and that's the
that's incorrect. Actually, Canada here famously had to have a specific taxation built up, so it was more expensive to pay the tax than it was to hire engineers to solve the water pollution problem that was actually quite critical until a few decades ago. So the waters here are maintained. It's not that they're indefinitely clean, and any sort of contamination like this, even after it rains here, there are signs up at the lake, and I live like 5 minutes away from Lake Ontario, and there's so much safety regulation. Canada is sometimes called a socialist republic for a reason. So we really take care of the lakes. They're really important, but they do get abused by big corporations, and it's a cat and mouse game. So I'll pull up the article here from I think 2 or 3 decades ago about the huge crazy problem they had.
I
I'm
got
I'm
to
not quite sure about the Ontario, but for
Ram.
Michigan, yeah,
We're not. We're not.
yeah,
We're not.
sure.
We're ending it there. I got 15 minutes to go. The next, real quick, because we are running out of time. Google, according to Bloomberg, they've done analysis and they claim that Google Maps in the United States regularly misleads people looking for abortion providers, instead pointing them towards non-medical crisis pregnancy centers. Hmm.
So the algorithm is tracking people and misguiding them to
No,
wrong locations?
no. This is Bloomberg clickbaiting.
Oh, okay.
And it says a Google Maps query for an abortion led her somewhere that offered the opposite, a so-called crisis pregnancy center, a type of non-medical organization with a mission to encourage women to go through with their unwanted pregnancies. Okay, now here's why. Because that clinic, right? There are clinics out there that exist that are trying to stop women from having an abortion, right? Now, that clinic is going to promote itself online. What words do you think it uses if its fundamental purpose is to stop women from having abortions? They're going to use words like abortion, right? A lot in their text, in their meta text, in their description, in the reviews, and whatever. Google's sucking up that data. And when the lady types in the word abortion, that website that says abortion 50 or 110 times gets shown to her as an option. And then Bloomberg says, haha, Google's sending women to leading abortion seekers to pro-life religious centers, as if it's Google's fault that how their algorithm works. That these clinics are using the word abortion on their websites, as they should, because they're. You understand the context now?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Right. So is this Google's fault that when you type in the word abortion, it's showing you places to get abortions and places that say we want to stop you from getting an abortion because it had the word abortion in the title of the web page?
Yeah, it's them, these clinics or organizations hacking the system and
Right. The
perhaps.
clinics are doing what every business on the planet's doing online, and Bloomberg is blaming Google for just having the algorithm that they've always had.
It's a new use case for retaining some SEO expertise for those trying to overcome the algorithmic blunt
Right. But
approach.
in fairness, that clinic might not be really being that manipulative in what they're saying on their sites. They might just be saying, "Are you looking for an abortion? We'd like to talk to you about not having an abortion, and we have alternatives to abortion." There might not really be. They just might be saying abortion a lot more often than abortion clinics do. And so when you type in the word abortion, they're going to send you to the site that says abortion 50 times rather than 5, and that happens to be the pro-life clinic. So it might not actually be straightforward down right down the middle SEO, manipulation of any kind.
And SEO means search
Yeah.
engine optimization, right?
Right.
Yeah. And my
Okay.
thing, if this person, this journalist, is presenting this case, was the opposite scenario. Because in order to make a valid conclusion, you must have the opposite data available as well. So, for example, how many times Google lead women to the right clinic where they intend to go to? 90%, 80%, 70, 50,
How
50.
do you
What
know right clinic
case?
though? At what point are you asking the
Right.
question of right clinic?
I
How
mean,
often?
right means what they intend. Like if I want to find CVS pharmacy, how many times Google Map is taking me to the CVS pharmacy instead of taking me to jungle? So
Okay, yeah, that's good.
you need to have opposing data to prove a point. And if this happened one time, this could be just accidental too. So invalid in my opinion.
So it says when users type the words abortion clinic into the map search bar, crisis pregnancy centers account for about a quarter of the top 10 search results. Yeah, because they have the word abortion, anti-abortion clinic, or don't have an abortion in all over their website. That this is how the algorithm works. Now, are you telling me that the person who's seeking the abortion is accidentally going to the clinic that is intentionally trying to talk them, not knowing that? And should I that would indicate to me that that person didn't really read the website of the place thoroughly. And uh, to what degree do we put the blame on the responsibility on the individual to make an informed decision, or put the ability for people to make decisions on Google? Because
Hold on, I have to Google
by the
that.
way,
I have to Google that. Hold on.
yeah, by the way, Bloomberg is not saying, and this is important, that these clinics are manipulating what they're saying or being, deceitful in what describing their services. Which, if they were, oh boy, Bloomberg would point that out. So they're not. The clinics are not fooling people into showing up at their clinics to try and talk them out of it. So the clinics are saying what their services are, and you're telling me people are going there mistakenly? And now whose responsibility is that? Google's or yours? Because they both have a deal with the term abortion.
Why did you drive your car into the lake? Because Google Maps said that's where I had to go.
Oh, thank you. That's a perfect example. So the next story, an in-depth look at Silicon Valley's historical corporate culture, how straight white men benefited, and efforts by women and minorities to push for change. A new generation of tech activists, organizers, and whistleblowers, most of whom are female, white, Gender diverse or queer may finally bring change. And this is by Margaret O'Mara from MIT Tech Review. It says, why can't tech fix its gender problem? A new generation of tech activists and whistleblowers, most of whom are female, non-white, gender diverse, or queer, may finally bring change. Um, well, there's one of the most interesting explanations to this that I've heard is, for example, why in parts of the world that are the most equal, like Scandinavia or the Nordics, in terms of gender diversity, in terms of gender empowerment, like people, generally the Nordics ranks incredibly well, as it should, for on a global scale of women empowerment, for example. And yet women are perhaps even less represented in tech in those parts of the world. It begs the question, well, why is that? Isn't the idea that when women are empowered, they're able to join whatever? And then the argument goes that, well, when women become able to do whatever they want, really anything, they don't choose tech. They choose to do the things they want to do, which are these other things. And it seems to be congruent with when I travel around the world and I host events. It is challenging to have a gender diverse audience in the Nordics, and they really emphasize that. And in other parts of the world, they don't, like Asia, for example. I used to do my events in Hong Kong, and I did monthly events in Poland and several other places. And there was more women in the audience in Poland and in Hong Kong who do not at all require at all or emphasize at all that there be equal number of men and women on stage at every event or on the boards of the companies, etc. How does that work? Why is it that the countries that make no effort at all, and in fact are seemingly kind of behind on a gender empowerment, have a higher ratio of women in tech? It's really, and the argument is because when women are able to do really whatever they want and they really become more empowered, they don't choose tech. They choose other things because they have everything they can choose from under the sky, under the sun, and tech takes a lower. That's how the argument goes. I'm not saying it's correct, but that's the argument. So
Yeah, women have more
I don't
options
know.
in life.
I don't know. I don't know if I fully agree with that. I think there are many, many, you know, how do I say it? I'm trying to be politically correct, but it's just there are many intangible things that is not women friendly. When I did my undergraduate in computer science and mathematics, I was pretty much the only woman in most of the classes. Like there was only very, very few women, and you can imagine on top of that, I am Black African woman. So it was just impossible. Most of the labs are fully men who are not, well, boys, I guess teenagers, we were young. They're not friendly. They just are like gigs on themselves. They don't really are not inclusive. So I usually felt like I don't belong there, even though, like, I finished the whole thing. And even when I started programming and got hired, I was the only woman, or if I can think of Black women in most of the meetings, in most of the things. So after a decade of being a programmer, I'm like, I don't want to be here anymore. That's how I felt. It's not by choice I did it, at least personally. It is just the entire environment, the entire ecosystem, the entire vibe is not that inviting for me. And I was in Canada, it wasn't even in Ethiopia. I was in Canada. So for me, that was part of it, even though now I'm back into it as well. But and that's what I hear from most of my friends, why we don't feel like we belong there, because it's just is not inviting environment.
okay, my,
Just going to make a quick comment, Tyler. I was thinking about my mom. She's the same age as Dr. Francine. And when she was a teenager, sorry, I'm writing, but when she was a teenager,
She wanted to be a lab technician, and it was not a female job. So she went out on her own, worked 2 jobs, and pulled it off. And I grew up not knowing the difference. So there is an amount of kind of personal drive required as well. I mean, she was a needle in a haystack, 5'1", and a female, and she had her own desires to make this happen for herself. Just to your point.
Bloomberg reporting that Meta focusing on Europe makes sense for 3 reasons: rising ARPU in the region to US levels, facing off regulatory headwinds, and attracting cheaper talent. And next, from Variety, Snapchat says its Snapchat Plus subscription, launched in June, now has more than 1 million users globally and adds features including priority stories, replies to celebs, etc. And Unity Software rejects AppLovin's $17.5 billion all-stock takeover offer, saying it would proceed with its deal to acquire ironSource for $4.4 billion in stock. So Unity is not being acquired, and I imagine that was a smart move on their part.
Well, you're assuming now they won't be a hostile, but they just
Right.
you see what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's smart of them to resist this offer from AppLovin, because just in receiving this offer from AppLovin for $17.5 billion, but which, by the way, prior to December or November when the market cratered, and if the market ever returns to any degree, there's going. I believe you've heard me say before, many of you, that Unity is potentially in the not so long future going to be the most sought after acquisition target, because it is a linchpin to enabling the metaverse. Perhaps more than any, Epic Games would be the only other company in that league, in that ballpark, of having such a tremendous, being in such a power position to enable the metaverse. And you have some of the world's biggest companies who all and some of them betting their companies, like literally betting the future of the companies, like Facebook is doing. And Unity is just the perfect acquisition target to enable that incredibly large wager that Facebook is making. And Facebook's not alone. There's a lot of some of the world's biggest companies all betting very, very, very big on the metaverse. And whoever acquires Unity is going to have a hugely disproportionate advantage in addressing the metaverse. So watch out for they will receive more. I said they're going to get acquisition offers, and there's one right there. That's not going to be the last now that they've turned it down. I think that's just going to excite the appetites of the other companies that we're probably hoping that they've turned it down anyway.
Hey, Tyler, while we're on video games,
Yeah.
and I tweeted this out before the weekend, Take-Two reported that Grand Theft Auto has sold, Grand Theft Auto 5 has sold like 170 million games. There's 170 million, subscribers, whatever you want to call it. And if you actually kind of do the math on the 170 million and what the unit costs are, one of my friends who's a Wall Street analyst just ran through the math, and he said that title Grand Theft Auto 5 is actually bigger financially than Marvel's Avengers. And I just pointed out, because I always talk about how big the video game business is, and a lot of times it doesn't get the attention, other than scandal, of the financial press. But I mean, they're bigger than motion pictures, and they're bigger than motion pictures plus recorded music as an industry, and that's why I wanted to throw it out there.
Okay. So some computational neuroscientists, whatever the hell those are, computational neuroscientists, say that self-supervised AI learning models have shown a closer correspondence to brain function than supervised learning models. That's interesting. That's bizarre. Tencent and Alibaba, whose stocks have dropped
Well,
6. Go ahead.
Tyler, yeah, I think that's not surprising, in that the human brain enters the world with a very small amount of algorithmic code and develops that code through experience. And experience is determined by environment. And environments are so variable and people move a lot that the fact that the human brain uh, does more unsupervised like learning than supervised learning is a direct derivative of how much memory you want to store genetically and how much you want to store experientially. So I'm not surprised by that finding at all.
Another, perhaps the biggest story in some sense. It's not really our direct ballpark. Hopefully Chris Fornoff jumps in here on this one. I'll pin it to the top of the room because I got to get running. This is the Newsweek version. Nuclear fusion breakthrough confirmed. California team achieved ignition. Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, which is where this kind of shit goes down, recorded the first case of ignition on August 8th, 2021, the results of which have now been published in the 3 peer-reviewed papers. Nuclear fission is the process that powers the sun, blah, 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 and it's what's going to get us out of the fucking climate catastrophe that we're in, if anything does. Ignition during a few, and then it goes into the details of what it is. In the latest milestone at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, researchers recorded an energy yield of more than 1.3 megajoules during only a few nanoseconds. Holy shit. For reference, 1 megajoule is the kinetic energy of a 1-ton mass moving at 100 miles per hour. The record shot was a major scientific advance in fusion research, which established that fusion ignition in the lab is possible, said the chief scientist at Lawrence Livermore. Achieving the conditions needed for ignition has been a long-standing goal for the inertial confinement fusion research and open access to new experimental regime where alpha particle self-heating outstrips all the cooling mechanisms of the fusion plasma. So they created a miniature sun, basically, very, very briefly. Ignition occurs when the heating from absorption of particles created in the fusion process overcomes the loss of mechanisms in the system for the duration of time. The landmark result comes after years of research and thousands of man-hours dedicated to improving and perfecting the process. And quote, the last quote says, "It is extremely exciting to have an existence proof of ignition in the lab," Hurricane said in a statement. "We're operating in a regime that no researchers have accessed since the end of nuclear testing, and it's an incredible opportunity to expand our knowledge as we continue to make progress." So, fingers crossed, they continue to make the progress that they're making so that we will have literally unlimited free energy.
1,000 authors, over 1,000 authors, and the comment about this, the nuclear explosions, because this is a very nuclear process. Up until very recently, these were limited to computer simulations. So this is one of the other ways that's not necessarily as radioactively dangerous. Because it's more containable, so that's sort of the keys behind why the technology is also very appealing. But congratulations to the team, and wait till you see kind of the article. It's like 1,000 authors. It's kind of crazy the scale of things nowadays.
What happens to...
So
Yes,
the
go ahead.
positive, sorry.
So just on the topic of the next room I'm going to do and fusion, we also do need to ask about the sustainability of it. Sounds amazing, but if you think about it, everybody starts using fusion. What's going to happen to the temperature of the surface of the planet? I'm not
Right,
talking global warming here,
right.
but Stephen Hawking's worked out that if we carry on with our exponential increase in use of energy, all of which ends up as heat basically, then it's only a matter of hundreds of years before literally the surface of the planet is glowing red hot with like server farms and stuff. We could beam that shit out to space. There's things we could do, but we do need to consider the sustainability, which is what I'm doing when this room ends. Not fusion specifically, but
Underwater
this
server
type of stuff.
Yeah, and the
Yeah,
fact is this is
literally boil the ocean.
farm.
perpetual unlimited energy, infinite energy. That's what is needed to power the mission to Mars or any other planets. And also this infinite energy, if it's perpetual and ongoing, you don't need many reactions happening at simultaneously. One should be enough to not only power the entire globe but beyond. So it's amazing. Uh, I don't think you would need many different reactions. One would be enough. But very good positive energy solution can come out of this. And also, again, the space uh, traveling to different planets can become a reality in our lifetime.
And I just did a back of the envelope kind of guesstimate, but a megajoule ought to be enough to power 500 homes for a year. And if that's achieved in a couple of nanoseconds, now we're talking real power.
It's real power.
Yep, real
It's
power.
We
it's
don't possess a grid anywhere in the world that could transmit that the amount of power. So this is science. It probably
no,
I don't want
but
to throw
they're
cold
gonna
salt
have
on
to
it, but
they'll have to
transmission.
use step down transformers before it touches the pedestrian grid for sure. They'll have to leave the
John,
yeah.
John, your calculation, mate, is off by many, many, many orders of magnitude. A megajoule, 1 million joules, is 277 watt hours. It's like what a car battery has in it. It's enough to power an American household for about 5 minutes. One household. Or maybe half an hour, depending on what they're using. Just
He
double check it, mate.
might be thinking megawatts.
I was dividing megajoules by 3,600 to get megawatt hours, and then looking at that compared to the average household use annually, um, which is 6,000 kilowatt hours per year. So, um, Ben, I appreciate um, your um tracing your calculation offline. Probably not for right now.
Yeah, sure.
And,
No problem. We
and
can do that.
I'm imagining, moving this reaction to the surface of Moon or in the space instead of hosting it on Earth, and then using that location to propel not only the space stations of future, but transmitting that energy down as needed in limited amounts instead of hosting it all on the globe.
And
Okay.
I think John's calculation is right, but I'm just going to double check now.
Did anybody have a tweet that they want to make sure that we share? One of my favorite that I found today thus far is from Evan from The Guardian that Facebook is injecting code into websites visited by its users to track them. The owner of Facebook and Instagram is using code to follow those who click links in its apps, according to an ex Google engineer. They're going to do whatever they can to keep the data flowing on their ad network. So, if anyone has anything remotely as interesting as that, let me know.
Well, Tyler, I also I should have mentioned your friend Jason Calcanis and
Yeah,
his
I've heard of
group.
that guy.
Their last the All In, right, guys.
Yep.
Their last podcast actually went extensively into the SoftBank issue and how little or zero due diligence that they were doing at the peak and how easy it was to get money from them. But they also, because we were speaking about WeWork, I think Jason, if I recall this correctly, said part of the issue was that he went from like buying like buildings in the Tenderloin district, which is a very low income area of San Francisco, relatively, everything's relative, and then he started because they gave him too much money, so he was started buying. Instead of buying like Class B buildings and Class C buildings and making them Class A buildings, he started buying Class A buildings because he had too much money. So, I mean, that was it. So people can listen to that podcast on their own. But I just wanted to point out it's the last all-in podcast that they just did. They just recorded.
Yep. Saudamini found one that confirms what we talked about at the start. The headline perfectly points out that you may soon see more ads on your iPhone. The App Store is one of the common places where you would find ads on your iPhone. Then there's stocks, news apps, and TV apps, etc. And indeed, you're going to start seeing more ads on your iPhone because Apple's going to be
You covered that earlier. You know that, right?
in one sense, but not directly. This is a separate headline from a different publication. That's I just like how directly they title that's the end result is you're going to start seeing more ads on your iPhones, which is bizarre because you paid a lot for that. You're paying a premium for that phone. How?
You'll only see it if you use certain apps like Apple,
Yeah,
like the map feature. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, Apple apps essentially. Yeah. Ola, the electric scooter company out of India, relaunches the S1 scooter at an introductory price of what is that?
1257 USD.
1,200 USD. That's cheaper than the gasoline alternatives, which is great because now you have an electric scooter that has the same general specifications as a combustion engine gasoline scooter for about 10% less. And these things are purchased by the millions every year around Asia, if not tens of millions. So let's hope to God these can happen. Anyone else with a big one before I got to jump?
Tyler, this one is on Friday, so I think we didn't cover it. It's that Alibaba, ByteDance, and some other big tech in China. The first time they revealed their algorithm to Beijing, to China's cyberspace administration. I think that's an interesting to observe for the future because they reveal the algorithm to the administration. So not sure what the regulation will change in China, and maybe that is also interesting for the Western world to observe how the regulation can regulate the algorithm. So all the big tech provide their algorithm to the CAC. Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be fun.
James
Re-
Webb said there might not be a Big Bang, so the data coming out of the James Webb Space Telescope seems to suggest that some galaxies are a little bit too old for what we see, so I have to rethink the model. That's kind of exciting.
So read the whole megajoule spat. Just check the chat, or just type megajoule into Wolfram Alpha. I've posted a link in the chat. And if they meant megawatt for that amount of time, it's that many times less energy again. So it's not a lot, but it's a progress.
A 327 square foot apartment with 5 rooms thanks to robotic furniture. Oh, this is a Japanese solution to living in smaller spaces.
A little echo to the Adam Newman thing.
Yeah. How we
That's
can.
super cool. A transforming apartment. That's I've seen people doing it like manually, where they kind of reconfigure their living space, but robotically, as long as you're not stuck in the mechanism, sounds really cool.
Yeah, they do it inside of when they live in vans. When you see people converting vans, like the back converts from a bedroom to an office or whatever, and the shower expands and blah blah blah. Why not apply that to a house? It's kind of an interesting idea. So I got to end it there. As I said, we even went 15 over, and we'll do it again manana. And thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time.
I think Ben is starting a room now.
Okay, perfect.
Yep, I'll start it early. It's an important